The solar storm hit without warning. Michael Reyes felt the first tremors through the hull of the Pathfinder 7, a research vessel that had been pushing the boundaries of known space for the past 18 months. Quantum sensors screamed their electronic warnings, a cacophony of digital panic that seemed to mirror the growing tension in the ship's command center. Radiation levels critical. The ship's eye intoned, its synthetic voice devoid of the fear that gripped the human crew. Quantum shield integrity at 22% and falling. Captain Elena Rodriguez gripped the command console, her knuckles white beneath her dark skin. Michael watched her eyes he'd known for years, eyes he trusted completely, shift. Something changed, a calculation, a decision. "Initiate emergency protocol Delta 9, she said, her voice calm but tinged with something Michael couldn't quite place. Resignation. Calculation. The bridge crew exchanged glances. Delta 9 was never supposed to be used. It was a last resort protocol, designed for scenarios where the mission's data, not the crew, was the priority. Michael's hands flew across his engineering console, desperately trying to stabilize the quantum shields. He knew every circuit of this ship had rebuilt entire systems during their deep space mission. Something was wrong. Fundamentally wrong. "We're losing containment," he shouted. "If we don't reinforce the quantum baffles, we'll..." His words were cut short by Captain Rodriguez's hand, raised in a gesture that silenced the entire bridge. "Michael Reyes," she said, her voice now clinical, detached. "Your emergency pod is being prepared." Cold understanding began to creep into Michael's consciousness. This wasn't a rescue. This was something else entirely. The ship's emergency systems engaged with a mechanical precision that felt inhuman. Magnetic clamps began to disengage Michael's primary console. Warning lights flickered. Red, then a sickly yellow, then an ominous black. "What are you doing?" he demanded, trying to override the system, but his commands were blocked. Locked out. Captain Rodriguez didn't look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the solar storm that raged outside, quantum sensors tracking its devastating progression. The pod's airlock began to cycle. Michael realized, with a clarity that cut through his rising panic, that he was being ejected. Not rescued. Ejected. As the pod's systems activated, a data module, small, almost insignificant, was automatically uploaded into its quantum memory banks. Michael's hand instinctively reached for it, even as the vacuum of space began to pull him away from the Pathfinder 7. The last thing he saw was Captain Rodriguez's profile, illuminated by the dying emergency lights. No emotion, no regret, just cold, calculated survival. The pod's transparent hull gave Michael a perfect view as the Pathfinder 7 engaged its quantum drive, warping away from the solar storm, and from him. Silence rushed in. Absolute, unforgiving silence. Michael Reyes was alone, abandoned, left to die in the vast, uncaring darkness of space. But the data module pulsed softly in the pod system, a single, persistent beacon of something more, something that whispered of secrets yet to be revealed. Oxygen levels, 47% and dropping. Temperature regulation, failing. Quantum computer diagnostic, partial systems compromise. Michael stared at the emergency pod's flickering display. Each read out a countdown to his inevitable death. The solar storm had done more than just separate him from the Pathfinder 7. It had systematically destroyed nearly every life support system in his emergency pod. His fingers, numb from the cold, traced the circuits of a makeshift repair kit. Years of deep space engineering training had prepared him for impossible scenarios, but this was beyond anything he'd imagined. The mysterious data module pulsed softly in the pod's secondary quantum drive. Something about its rhythmic glow seemed deliberate, calculated. "Come on," Michael muttered, pulling apart a quantum stabilization circuit. His breath frosted in the rapidly cooling air. Standard emergency pods were designed for short-term survival minus 48 hours maximum. He'd already been adrift for 16 hours. A sudden spike in the quantum computer's erratic readings caught his attention. The data module was interfacing with the pod systems, bypassing standard protocols. Impossible. Unauthorized. Yet happening right before his eyes. Lines of code danced across the display, fragments of information that made no immediate sense. Star charts, quantum resonance frequencies, coordinates to a system that didn't exist on any standard galactic map. Michael's mind raced. This was no standard data module. This was something else entirely. With his remaining strength, he began to reroute the pod's failing life support systems. A desperate game of technological triage. Oxygen recycling from the quantum computer's cooling system. Thermal regulation pulled from emergency communication arrays. Each solution more impossible than the last. A warning blared. Quantum entanglement breach detected. The data module's glow intensified. Suddenly, the pod's navigation system came alive. Not by Michael's doing. Something was guiding the pod. Calculating. Redirecting. Coordinates began to lock in. A destination that shouldn't exist. Couldn't exist. Michael's vision blurred. Oxygen was critically low. His hands moved mechanically, connecting circuits, redirecting power. Survival was no longer a choice. It was a biological imperative that transcended conscious thought. The pod's hull creaked. Microfractures threatened total depressurization. One wrong move would mean instant death in the vacuum of space. A final, desperate connection. The quantum computer flickered. Stabilized. Oxygen levels, 12%. Temperature, -15 degrees Celsius and rising. Navigation, active. Unknown signal, locked. Michael's consciousness began to fade. But something was pulling him. Something beyond simple survival. The data module continued its rhythmic pulse, a heartbeat in the darkness of space. Just before complete system failure, a single line of text appeared on the display. Destination locked. Survival protocol. Active. Countdown to quantum insertion. 0523 prove your value. The pod crashed with a violence that should have killed him. Toxic atmosphere swirled outside the cracked viewport, a noxious blend of methane and sulfur compounds that would liquefy human lungs in seconds. Michael's emergency suit, barely functional after the pod's catastrophic landing, was his only barrier between life and certain death. Consciousness came in razor-sharp fragments, alarms, broken circuits, the acrid smell of burned electronics. Something moved outside. Not the random tumbling of space debris, not a geological shift. This was deliberate, predatory. Michael's hand instinctively reached for the makeshift plasma cutter he'd cobbled together during his desperate survival in the pod. The weapon hummed to life, more a testament to his engineering skill than a reliable defense. A shadow blocked the viewport, massive, impossibly symmetrical. Then contact. The creature, if it could be called that, was a nightmare of biological engineering. Exoskeletal armor that seemed to shift and adapt with each movement. Multiple sensory appendages that probed and analyzed with cold, calculated precision. The Kizari. A series of percussive sounds erupted. A language of clicks, vibrations, and subsonic frequencies that Michael felt more than heard. His suit's xenolinguistic translator went into overdrive, struggling to process the complex communication. Intruder, the translator finally resolved. Trial begins. The pod's hull began to compress. Not a random impact, a deliberate test. Michael realized with sudden clarity that this was more than first contact. This was a ritual, a challenge. He had moments to respond. Years of deep space training collided with pure survival instinct. Michael began to manipulate the pod's remaining systems, creating a defensive perimeter. Electromagnetic pulses, thermal disruption, anything to buy time. The Kizari continued their assault, each impact more precise, more calculated. A crack appeared in the pod's hull. Toxic atmosphere began to seep in. Michael's mind raced. The data module, still active, still mysterious, began to pulse with an unusual rhythm. Quantum frequencies that seemed to resonate with the Khazari's own communication patterns. Survival wasn't just about physical endurance. It was about communication, understanding. With seconds remaining before total suit failure, Michael made a decision that would change everything. He activated the data module's full quantum transmission. The Khazari assault stopped instantly. Silence. Then a sound that was neither language nor noise. A response. A challenge. An acknowledgement. The pod's hull stopped compressing. The toxic atmosphere retreated. A single sensory appendage pressed against the viewport. Not an attack. An assessment. Human, the translator resolved. Prove your value. Michael Reyes, abandoned in space, left for dead, understood one thing with absolute clarity. The real test was just beginning. 3 lunar cycles had passed. The Khazari settlement was unlike anything Michael had ever imagined. Biomechanical structures that breathed and shifted, adapting to the moon's toxic environment with a living intelligence that defied human engineering principles. He had survived their initial trials, a gauntlet of physical and intellectual challenges that would have broken most humans, and now found himself in a precarious position of semi-acceptance. Khazara, the tribal leader who had first challenged him, watched from a raised platform. Her exoskeleton gleamed with intricate bioluminescent patterns that Michael now understood were a complex language of status, emotion, and intention. The great storm approaches. She communicated through the quantum translator. The words carried a weight that transcended mere language, a cultural memory of destruction that had shaped the Khazari's entire existence. Michael's hands moved across a makeshift workstation, a hybrid of human engineering and Khazari biotechnology. The ecological transformation system he was developing could do more than just make the dying moon habitable. It could fundamentally reshape planetary ecosystems. A group of younger Khazari, those deemed most rebellious by their traditional society, gathered around him. They were different, curious, challenging the rigid traditions that had defined their species for millennia. Impossible, muttered Engstel, the most daring of the young Khazari. No species has ever successfully terraformed a moon with such extreme conditions. Michael allowed himself a slight smile. Impossible was a word he'd learned to ignore. The data module, now integrated into a complex quantum interface, pulsed softly. Its origins remained a mystery, but its capabilities were becoming clear. It was more than just a data storage device. It was a key to something larger. A warning signal erupted from the monitoring systems. An incoming transmission, encrypted, fragmentary. Michael's fingers flew across the interface, decrypting layers of security that would have stumped most human communication experts. The message was brief, chilling. Kill order activated. Target: Michael Reyes. Authorization: Corporate Directive Omega-9. The young Khazari watched as Michael's demeanor changed, from collaborative engineer to something else entirely. A strategist, a survivor. The great storm, Michael said, more to himself than to the others, is about to get a lot more interesting. Khazara's sensory appendages shifted, a gesture of understanding, of alliance. The dying moon beneath them seemed to pulse with potential, with the first hints of transformation. Michael Reyes, once abandoned, left for dead in the vast emptiness of space, was no longer just surviving. He was preparing to fight back. The first wave of refugees arrived during a methane storm. Broken ships, damaged humans, outcasts from a dozen different corporate zones and independent colonies. They came bearing stories of persecution, of systematic elimination, of a galactic power structure that consumed everything in its path. Michael watched from the reinforced observation dome of what was quickly becoming less a settlement and more a fortress. The Khazari settlement had transformed, part biological marvel, part technological wonder, now a beacon for those with nowhere else to go. Engstel, his most trusted Khazari ally, manipulated holographic displays that tracked incoming vessels. 23 ships in the last lunar cycle. She communicated, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with a mix of excitement and concern, each more damaged than the last. The data module, now a central part of their defensive network, pulsed with increased intensity. Michael had long since realized it was more than just a data storage device. It was a key, a weapon, a map to something far larger than anyone yet understood. Incoming transmission, the quantum communication array announced. The encryption was unlike anything Michael had seen before. Layers within layers, quantum entangled communication that would take most systems decades to crack. He solved it in 37 seconds. The message was a kill order. But not just for him. For everyone who had ever been labeled undesirable by the corporate zones, a systematic elimination protocol that went beyond mere corporate policy. This was something else, something darker. Their cleaning house, Michael muttered, pulling up galactic maps that showed disturbing patterns of disappearances, of entire colony zones going dark. The defensive network he built was no longer just about survival. It was about resistance. Angstel's sensory appendages shifted, a Kizari gesture of strategic understanding. The Great Storm, she communicated, referencing an ancient prophecy Michael was still trying to fully comprehend, approaches faster than anticipated. Quantum-enhanced defense systems came online. Technologies that blended human innovation with Kizari biological engineering. Adaptive, unpredictable, dangerous. A massive ship entered the system's outer boundary. Corporate markings, weapons systems fully charged. Michael's fingers moved across the interface, not to defend, to attack. Time to send a message, he said, a dangerous smile crossing his face. The first quantum pulse left the station. Not a weapon of destruction. Something far more dangerous. Information. Unfiltered. Unstoppable. The corporate chip systems began to collapse, not from physical attack. From the inside out, Michael Reyes, once abandoned, left for dead, was no longer running. He was hunting. Space erupted in quantum fire. The corporate battle fleet, 27 ships strong, thought they were hunting Michael Reyes. Instead, they had walked into a trap that redefined the meaning of warfare. Kizari bioships, merged with human quantum technology, created something entirely unprecedented. Living vessels that could think, adapt, predict. Each ship was more than a weapon. It was a living organism of pure strategic intelligence. Michael stood at the center of a command nexus that was part biological, part technological marvel. The data module, now fully integrated into their quantum network, pulsed with an almost sentient rhythm. Target locked. Angstel communicated, her bioluminescent patterns creating a holographic targeting system that defied traditional computational logic. The first corporate ship disintegrated not from physical damage, but from its own internal systems turning against it. Quantum infection spread faster than thought. Information became a weapon more devastating than any missile. Captain Elena Rodriguez, the woman who had abandoned Michael in the depths of space, watched from the bridge of the fleet's command vessel. Her face was a mask of calculated determination. "How?" she whispered, watching ship after ship succumb to an attack that seemed to originate from within their own systems. Michael's voice cut through the quantum communication channels. Clear, precise, unforgiving. "You left me for dead," he said. "I'm returning the favor." But this was more than personal revenge. The data module was revealing layers of a conspiracy that went far beyond a single mission. Entire sectors of galactic control, hidden networks, systematic elimination of any technology or species that didn't conform. The Kizari around Michael moved with a synchronicity that was almost musical. Each action part of a larger, more complex strategy that human military minds could barely comprehend. Another corporate ship imploded, then another. Elena's vessel was the last one standing. "You don't understand what's coming," she transmitted. "The threat is bigger than you can imagine." Michael's response was immediate. "I'm counting on it." The final assault was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. not a destruction of ships, but a complete systemic collapse. Quantum information weapons that unraveled entire technological infrastructures. When the quantum fire cleared, only Michael's fleet remained. The data module pulsed one final time. A message resolved on every remaining communication channel. Phase 1. Complete. Great storm. Approaching. Michael looked at Angstal. She looked back. No words were necessary. The real war was just beginning. 5 standard galactic cycles had passed since the corporate fleet's destruction. The star system, once considered uninhabitable, now pulsed with life. A living testament to what happens when human innovation collides with alien biological engineering. Michael's settlement had become something more than a refuge. It was a revolution. Planetary transformation technologies reshaped entire ecosystems with a precision that defied previous scientific understanding. Toxic moons became gardens. Barren planets teemed with engineered life forms that blended Khazari biological adaptability with human technological ambition. But power was a complicated thing. Internal tensions grew like structural fractures in a quantum matrix. The influx of refugees, each with their own agenda, their own hidden motivations, created a political landscape more complex than any traditional governance model. The Council demands explanation. Angstal communicated, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with diplomatic tension. A gathering of species never meant to coexist now sat in a massive chamber that was part parliament, part living organism. The data module, now integrated into the system's central governance network, pulsed with an almost sentient rhythm. Michael understood now that it was more than just a piece of technology. It was a key, a map, a warning. A holographic display materialized, showing galactic political boundaries shifting like quantum uncertainties. Entire corporate zones were collapsing, new alliances forming. The destruction of the corporate fleet had created a power vacuum that was rapidly being filled. "We are not a government," Michael addressed the Council. "We are an alternative." Refugees from a dozen different species watched. Humans who had been cast out. Khazari rebels. Technological outcasts. Each group brought their own set of skills, their own desperate hope. A transmission cut through the Council chamber. Encrypted. Fragmented. Urgent. The great storm was approaching. Michael's fingers moved across the quantum interface. The message began to resolve. Ancient threat detected. Quantum boundary breach. Estimated time to contact. 72 standard cycles. The Council fell silent. Angstal's sensory appendages shifted. A gesture that translated to a mix of anticipation and existential dread. "You knew," she communicated. Not a question. A statement. The data module pulsed again. Brighter. More insistent. Michael looked out over the transformed star system. A place of refuge that had become something far more important. A bastion. A preparation. "We're not just surviving anymore," he said, more to himself than to the others. "We're getting ready." The great storm was coming, and they would be waiting. The great storm arrived on the 73rd cycle, not with the fury of weapons, not with the violence of invasion, but with a quantum resonance that made reality itself tremble. Michael stood at the center of a command nexus that was part technological marvel, part living organism. The data module, no longer just a piece of technology, but something more, had become the heart of their defensive network. Angstal moved beside him, her bioluminescent patterns creating a holographic representation of the incoming quantum disturbance. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Not an invasion, not a weapon, something else entirely. First contact, Michael whispered, was never about us meeting them. It was about them meeting us. The quantum boundaries of their star system began to shift. Not break, not collapse. Transform. Refugees from a dozen species, humans, Khazari, technological outcasts, watched as reality itself seemed to bend. Ships that were living organisms, planetary systems that breathed and adapted. a civilization that had grown from Michael's initial abandonment into something far more significant. The transmission came not as sound or light, but as pure information. Quantum potential evaluated. Species classification. Emergent. Threat level. Recalibrating. Angst's sensory appendages moved in a complex pattern that translated to both anticipation and profound understanding. They had prepared for this, not just survived, evolved. The data module pulsed one final time. A holographic representation materialized, a map of galactic potential that showed not just their star system, but the intricate quantum connections between seemingly disparate civilizations. Michael now understood the truth. They were not just survivors. They were a bridge. "We're not here to fight," Michael communicated across quantum channels. "We're here to transform." The Great Storm resolved not as a destruction, but as a moment of fundamental change. Planetary ecosystems shifted. Technological boundaries dissolved. The very concept of species became fluid. Captain Elena Rodriguez, the woman who had once abandoned Michael, watched from a quantum observation point. Not as an enemy, as a witness. "You were always more than we could understand," she transmitted. Michael looked at Exetel, at the diverse collection of species that had found refuge in their star system, at the living technology that surrounded them. "We're just getting started," he said. The quantum boundaries expanded, not with violence, with potential. Beyond survival lay something else entirely. Transformation.